to a Feather of Light podcast. It's the podcast where I like to bring you into discussions around mental health, or other times I'm just riffing on what are my personal recollections about, can be my life or psychedelic experiences, or sometimes it gets kind of philosophical. But really, this is just meant to be an educational space where I can also maybe advocate for some topics that I feel are important to consider when you're entering into a counseling space or a coaching space, or maybe you're in a position of facilitation and you just want to learn a little bit more about these topics that I believe I understand. And if I don't understand them, I often do learn more about them, or I'm open to learn more about them through these discussions. And today I kind of went in with a little bit of hesitancy. I was not sure if I even really felt like doing a podcast today. I usually like to do them first thing in the morning. So, 10 a.m., a little bit of cacao in my system. Feels really, easy. And there's a bit of almost like an unconscious flow to it. But this afternoon, it's actually closer to about 5 p.m. It's 4:30. And I have a cup of tea here. Just regular decaf, herbal chai tea or something like that. So I'm not near as stimulated as I usually am. And I was reading through this list of needs, which I like to pull up when I work with clients. Sometimes it's helpful when we're trying to identify certain needs and we don't really have the language, so I just pull up this list. It's actually taken from the nonviolent communication website. So there's a list of needs and a list of feelings, which are helpful when you're trying to speak with a nonviolent lens. But anyway, looking through the list of needs, and I was like, I feel like a lot of these needs, like just the one word, could be a topic for a podcast. And then I landed on sexual expression. And I was like, oh, whoa. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a huge topic. That's, I think, maybe something we don't always talk about, at least not with strangers, or maybe it's more of an intimate conversation that we'll have with a partner or something. But I'd like to normalize that talking about sex and creating safety around it can be so liberating. And it isn't about making things sexually charged, or, I'd say consent is important when you're engaging these conversations. You don't want to make someone uncomfortable by jumping into this topic. If they do feel like it's something that they'd rather not talk about, that could actually come across as crossing boundaries, for sure. But I'm assuming because you're tuned into this podcast that maybe you're interested, but maybe this is a bit of a forewarning that this might be a sensitive topic. And I just want to give you the space to opt out if talking about this topic very generally makes you uncomfortable, or listening to, I suppose you're not talking with me, but listening to a podcast where I talk about it very generally might make you uncomfortable. Now, I just want to be clear. I'm not talking about having sex as much as, this isn't like a pornographic discussion at all. I would say this is more of just my reflections on being a male and what my experience of, I suppose, expressing myself in different ways, or maybe the hesitancy to express myself at times, and maybe just some of my more intimate reflections around how I feel when I'm in a container with my partner, or what I've felt in the past and I've worked on over the years. So anyway, jumping right on in. We all have this need innately from the time that I would say probably in our, according to Freud and his theory about how the sexual drives kind of develop, this is something that starts in infancy. So something like age 4 or 5, there's like 3 or 4 different psychosexual stages, as he calls them, and then we begin to, in a way, find a way to meet those needs and channel it in a healthy way, right? Like, you know, he looked to, there was the Oedipus and Electra complex, and that's basically this like unconscious desire to have sex, and the first male or female you are in contact with would be your mother or your father. So it's like that's where those feelings automatically are manifested when we're young, just unconsciously. But then we find a person whom we can have a healthy relationship with that is of the opposite gender or of the same gender, depending on your sexual orientation, of course. But this is how Freud would have seen us initially finding a way to express ourselves. And as that continues into teenhood, adolescence, and into our adult years, I find that we're actively searching for ways to meet this need, right? This deeper core need for sexual expression. And in a society that I would say is deeply hyper-sexualized. What an obstacle we might face to truly meeting this need in a fulfilling and sustainable way versus falling into, let's just call them addictions or traps or unsustainable cycles of maybe consuming pornographic material, or, you know, getting attention from others and seeking attention from others to fulfill some kind of sexual need, which isn't necessarily honoring boundaries, or maybe even really what we actually want. Maybe it's not even actually getting our needs met through that, but there's this attempt at doing so. I'm just sort of using the example of like you're on social media and you're like DMing people continuously. You're just like searching. There's like a hunt in a way. And yeah, I think that's also a pretty normal way that some men might meet this need for attention, which also could be an extension of a deeper desire to have their sexuality expressed and witnessed and acknowledged. And, you know, same could go in terms of women whom do sex work. And like, I'm in no way judgmental of that. I feel like that's a way that women can empower themselves, and they can sublimate desires to be witnessed in a sexual way and appreciated and acknowledged for their sexuality. And, you know, the fact that they can actually make some sort of profession out of it, I would say is actually very liberating. And I think there's this other side of it where, you know, there's a component of what society sees as shameful being imposed upon women whom I would say are just essentially finding a way to be entrepreneurial and, you know, sublimating their unconscious desires. And then maybe due to whatever, you know, could be jealousy or could be just an unconscious feeling of our own shame being projected onto other, we sort of see that people making money in this way is shameful. And I really offer people a space to reflect on that and see, yeah, like, could you see yourself on some level taking that same route if you had the capacity to do so, and you could feel like there's a position of empowerment through it? And I don't know, like, I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a content creator and create an OnlyFans and all that necessarily, but like, I just want to say that I think it makes perfect sense why people would pursue those things and how they could feel fulfilled through those pursuits. And that I see myself as something of an ally to those whom go through those stages of, you know, working and essentially being body workers in that sense, or sex workers. Anyway, I didn't mean to go into that route, but it makes sense. You know, this isn't something I've personally experienced, but I think I've met women over the years and tried to hold space and understand the perspectives of different types of sex workers, and kind of like, you know, understanding a little bit more about their stories and kind of like what their history of trauma has been like, and while they actively heal, kind of like how that might actually change the type of sex work that they do, or, you know, maybe if they do decide to change their relationship to their body, it's like how that might reflect in the way that they express themselves. Maybe it becomes more about the art form. Maybe it becomes more about the pleasure and the kink and the taboo of it. I don't know. I don't think I have enough, to be honest, of a knowledge base about this to speak to it adequately. But these are just kind of my perspectives from the women that I've talked to. Primarily women. I mean, I suppose you can probably, if you go out there and look for it, you could probably find there's a decent amount of males that actually work in this profession as well. I don't know if there's a disproportionate amount, or maybe it's like you specifically have to be in the person who would consume that kind of material to understand and meet these people, right? I don't think I've ever actually been onto a male sex workers page, and you know, it's because I'm a heterosexual male. But at the same time, I feel like if you meet them out in the real world, they're probably just like everyone else. I'm sure they have, you know, some degree of openness about their profession, but like unless you were to like really ask them and get curious about what they do, and were to come from a place of creating safety for them to do so, and respect and trust, I can't imagine why it would come up. It's just random conversation, right? You're just like walking down the street, and that's just kind of how they introduce themselves, you know? And yeah, I guess it's, speaking of my personal experience, yeah, you know, I'm someone who I think I've just had a very challenging relationship to my sexual energy over the years. And from the time I was a young teen, I don't think I had I suppose, the safety. Like, it was never encouraged for me to really, well, obviously not look at pornography. Like, I don't think any parent tells their kid much about the world of pornography, but I almost feel like that's a conversation that they should have, like a man, maybe like a father having that conversation with their son in a healthy way, like introducing it, but also maybe telling them like this isn't like exactly a representation of the act of lovemaking, and there's a lot you should know outside of that. Like, I never really had that kind of role model or mentorship, and I felt like I really didn't understand any of these feelings from a young age, right? Yeah, I felt like I wasn't able to talk to women at all, and it was really scary, actually. That's what came up for me a lot, was fear. The idea of these feelings and not knowing what to do with them, and not knowing how to express myself with women. I felt like there was a lot of fear. Just to add as I'd say an important side note, I was actually raised Christian, so from a young age, it was imparted into me that sex is shameful, and if you do these things that are considered sins, you're going to hell. So I think it makes perfect sense, if I really, you know, look at that perspective, how I started to associate the act of engaging in these type of lewd acts as being something to be afraid of, is because it's like, oh, if I start to do this, then I'm going to go to hell. Anyway, just thought I'd sort of mention that as a side tangent. And when I was like 14, it's when I think I just wanted to start reaching out to women as like friends. And I remember that I was so much more comfortable in the friendship, that I didn't even really know how to approach women in any other way. So it was kind of like, I remember I would go and smoke cigarettes with a couple of the women that I knew that I was very attracted to, but I was kind of like, yeah, I don't think I have any chance in the world, and I don't even know how I'd bridge that gap. So I feel so much more at ease just like talking. And I think this was like a really beautiful introduction into trying to have a healthy friendship with the female energy. But at the same time, I didn't really necessarily have the, I would say, emotional maturity, capacity, or even on some level the perspective to really create that, what I would say, healthy sister energy, like, you know, viewing other women as friends, and the capacity for there to be like a sistership forming, right? Not sexualizing women was something that was very, very challenging for me for pretty much most of my teen years, right? Up until I was probably, maybe even in my 20s, there was still a lot of that. And I think I remember having a certain moment of realization around, well, my own sexual energy in general, right? I think I started to gradually become more self-aware around how inappropriate or irresponsible it was to be a masculine and to kind of just like spill out sexual attention or kind of like assume that other people could meet my sexual needs, even if it wasn't necessarily like that's their responsibility. I feel like maybe I'm just speaking from a white male sort of privileged position, but I feel like many males, we kind of have this sense of entitlement where from a young age, unless we're told otherwise by a healthy masculine, it's kind of like we're entitled to having women sort of like serve us in this way, or they are objects in a sense. And oh boy, any masculine presenting energy that views women as such will be humbled over the years. And I can imagine it's a hard lesson to have to learn. But ideally, men do learn that, over the years of developing healthy, functioning relationships with women, sexual or otherwise, or just having healthy role models, like female role models in their life. Like, ideally, their mom would be the first point of contact that would allow a man to understand, like how they ought to treat women, just in terms of kind of like seeing them as an extension of the mom that they care so much about. But at the same time, when you get into sexual energy, it feels kind of like there's this tendency to rebel, or like obviously you don't want to focus on that potentially underlying or unconscious Oedipus complex, and it's kind of like you want to sort of shift and you almost just like reverse the polarity in a way. So if anything associated with your mom makes you uncomfortable, you're basically going to treat women like they're the opposite of whatever you've associated with your mom in some weird strange way, when you're sexualizing them. At least I'd like to hope not in general, but that's kind of like how I would see a young masculine mind, or even a young feminine mind. Is kind of like you don't want to associate the two. It's like, I mean, some people, if that's their kink, and I get it, I do feel like that is something that can be healthily understood and integrated versus kind of just transformed into a kink and held onto and enabled and perpetuated. But like, I do feel that there is a valid basis to why men and women hold this kind of like deeper desire. And it's like, unless they're able to sit with and heal the relationship to the masculine or the feminine, the opposite gender, or whichever one they are in contact with sexually, that deep underlying, like, let's just call it friction, gets carried forward through this kink. And I would say that causes tremendous strain on the nervous system, right? If you've ever heard of, I believe it's sympathetic versus parasympathetic sex. So it's just really understanding, simply put, there's a degree to which you're either dysregulating your nervous system through sex. There's a kind of like almost disassociative element to how you engage within sex. Or there's parasympathetic, which is the exact opposite of that, which is where you're actually soothing and regulating and calming the nervous system through the act of engaging in sexual intercourse. So it's kind of like, and this isn't just about the act of the penetration itself either. This is really about all of it, all of the, the surrounding foreplay, even just kind of like when you flirt with your partner and it gets like really sexual and you're just kind of like, getting into that space of getting aroused and arousing each other. So it's kind of like, I wish I could introduce all the fancy energetics of this. I'm not overly familiar with Tantra as I guess like a conscious practice. I've engaged in it intuitively at least a few times. And it does feel like, as long as you have attunement to your breath and as long as you have attunement to your body, it's something that most people could intuitively at least like grasp the fundamentals of. But clearly you have to have that capacity to engage in a parasympathetic way. I would say if you're engaging in a let's just call it a super intense sexual experience that you're kind of disassociating into your fantasies. Your nervous system's getting super wound up and excited and primal. Nothing wrong with that, but I would say that there's a way to which that could potentially take you out of what I'd consider the delicate, soft, gentle, loving exchange that the tantric practice, I would say, typically thrives within. I mean, not always. I mean, I think if you look to the archetype of Shiva and Kali, there's something there to this primal feminine energy domineering over the gentle, submissive energy of Shiva, right? It's like there's this exchanging of the roles, or there's this swapping of the roles, and it's kind of like there's an aspect to which it's not about one being a full embodiment of the light and then the other being the full embodiment of the dark, and one's only the feminine energy, one's only the masculine energy. No, I think it's certainly each person contains within them the balance and the interplay and the sort of dance of the two within the self. And there's the shifting, there's the dance of both energies within each person coming into play and creating a polarization with how each person is presenting in a given moment. So, sometimes the feminine energy will be presenting a masculine side, and then sometimes the masculine will be presenting the feminine side. And that's kind of where I'm referring to the Kali being the domineering energetic force, whereas the Shiva is the submissive in the kind of archetypal photo you see, where he's kind of like completely submissive and being essentially mounted by Kali. So yeah, like, who's to say that you have to always just be in that super chill, what I call parasympathetic response, to fully embrace this, meeting of the two opposite polarizations of energy. And it's not all just about being in the soft. I'm sure there's a need for things to be intense and primal and kind of unhinged at times. So yeah, that's just my thoughts around that. But like, I guess cycling back to my own personal experiences, yeah, I think I spent a long time not understanding like anything about who I am from a sexual perspective, and I felt so much more comfortable just denying it. I felt actually quite content with denying my sexual impulses for most of my teen years, and if it came up, it was kind of like, well, what are you gonna do with that, dummy? How are you gonna achieve this thing that you feel like you're meant to do? Good luck with that. And it was kind of like there was almost this part of me, which I definitely feel was there, that was just like willing to beat me up and kind of like, in a sense, just made fun of me, like kind of mocked me, or is like, all right, yeah, sure, good luck, bud. Like, the lack of confidence spiraling into like an almost like jester like part that was just so happy to make fun of me and kind of just keep me almost suspended or repressed in terms of my capacity to engage with others sexually. And yeah, this further complicated as I got older, obviously. I do believe when I started to actually receive any degree of sexual attention, I started to kind of be in denial and in shock. And I don't think I actually had the means to reciprocate a healthy like sexual exchange until I was probably at least 20, which is wild. But considering males' brains take so freaking long to develop, I suppose that's kind of on par. But that being said, I had encounters in my teen years. I think I lost my virginity when I was 14. It was honestly really horrible, not a very enjoyable experience at all. But I did feel like none of that really was like what I was looking for, and actually allowing me to feel fully expressed and met in a safe way. I will just say right now, like, safety is so bloody important for me and my personal experience of a healthy sexual exchange. And I mean, I do feel like there could be a lot of people out there that that's not like a necessary prerequisite, but I also really question that just from my own perspective of just how much more in just incredibly fulfilling it is to be in a, I would say it's whether you're in a relationship, like a committed relationship or not, but in a dynamic where you just feel so goddamn emotionally safe. It's just like you just have that deep, 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 deep trust. And then how much different the experience of sex feels like in your body, and your level of attunement to your breath, and your ability to feel safe in like this, I'd say this tendency to feel like you need to perform, right? Like as a male, holy shit, has that dominated my self-worth for pretty much most of my entire life. It's like, I am less than unless I am doing this exact format of performance. And oh man, when I started to unpack my wounds at in counseling school, I started to realize how much of a people pleaser I really am, but also I think was expressing in such an extreme way before. And now I've kind of like worked on and sort of mitigated some of those feelings, but like because of how I would show up in my sexual encounters, I was so focused on other. It was just savior complex in a sense, but it was kind of like I was essentially trying to emotionally caretake other so dramatically that I didn't give a fuck about my needs. I wouldn't express them. I didn't really feel the need to communicate. It actually felt awkward to communicate anything. And yeah, the degree to which I was just so focused on other. And, it was actually really, I won't say relaxing. There was a relief to it. There was a relief to, oh, I can just focus on other. That's great. I can live vicariously through their experience. And, maybe sometimes this person hasn't had their needs met for a long time. And when they do, you can just really live, like I said, vicariously and feel very accomplished, I suppose, through allowing another person to go deep into that space. But then, of course, your own needs aren't met. And there's, I would say, a lack of self-love within your, I guess, like selfless acts of lovemaking. And then there potentially, not always, but there could be a gradually you're building up resentment towards the other person who's just receiving so much. And there's in many cases a lack of reciprocity if you're focusing so much on the other person's needs. So I just want to say how common that is, by the way. I realized when I was in school that we were having some pretty vulnerable conversations about sex. It's just one of the topics. It's one of the lecture, I guess, focuses when we were in counseling school. Just how many people I noticed, I would say, just kind of do the same thing, right? They maybe reached a certain point where they're like, well, my needs don't really matter so much. Well, I'm not going to get my sexual needs fulfilled, right? My sexual expression isn't really all that important because it hasn't been honored for so long that if I focus on another person, it's like I get the golden star, right? I feel like I'm accomplished. I feel like I'm good enough in a way. And we kind of attach our self-worth to the pleasing of another person. And that's literally a romantic expression of the people-pleasing dynamic. And then, we get lost. We forget about something that we inherently deserve as well, something that we've been seeking since we were young, something that we've been hoping and dreaming of since we were of, whatever I would say healthy age it is, where you start to seek this type of engagement. But I would say there's something there to don't feel weird if you're focusing a lot on the other person. But at the same time, maybe just asking yourself that question, is there a way that you can meet their needs and really honor them and really channel that desire into a way of being of service to that person, but at the same time, really allowing yourself to feel like they can reciprocate that and you can receive that pleasure and that love and that appreciation that you deserve. dang, you deserve it too. If you're given too much, maybe just asking yourself that question, why are you giving so much to others? You deserve all that juicy love, that loving energy, that appreciation, that acknowledgement. So yeah, I suppose if there's any other topics around sexual expression I want to get into is finding ways to alchemize our energy at times when we're not able to, let's just say, be fully received. Like maybe we're single, or we're having a hard time just focusing on life. Like I feel like this is something that I've seen on a Facebook feed. I don't know if it's true, but let me know if it's something that you've read about, and maybe you can tell me more about this. But apparently people who are ADHD, there's a type of hyper-sexualization that comes along with that. And that could be related to dopamine, that could be related to focus, that could be related to who knows. But if that is the case, gosh, that makes sense how your attention gets so easily pulled away from you when you're either unconsciously or consciously fixated on sex, and you're not really fully aware of how your attention can be really fully cultivated when you're essentially alchemizing these feelings and acknowledging and validating, which might just be these parts of you that are using that as a distraction. And then just how much more present you can be in your own life, how much better you can feel in your body, or how much more, let's just say, balanced or attuned you can feel to your nervous system when it's not about this experience of disassociation, which I would say is quite common if you're seeking this this form of pleasure externally, or if you're fixating so much on the representation, the external representation of sexuality, that it's kind of pulling you outside of your body or pulling you away from whatever it is that you're trying to do in the present moment. Maybe you start to fantasize, maybe you start to visualize, maybe you start to imagine things. And how that can be so debilitating if that continues consistently over a longer period of time. And you can work with these parts. You can start to dialogue with these parts of you that are feeling kind of pulled in all these different directions from all the social media ads, or all the content that's like, maybe not explicitly sexual, but it's kind of just like subtly sexual, or ads and all this marketing that's literally using sex as manipulation. So it's just kind of like, take your power back by recognizing that, there's this subtle form of disassociation that you engage with. If you guys didn't know this, one of the main reasons people go on social media is because they're horny and they're searching for some way to satiate those feelings. And at the same time, you might not even consciously recognize it if that's not always the primary reason you're doom scrolling. But I would say that this is something that's so commonly applied, and it's understood by marketing companies, right? Sex sells. It really does. Like, it's like marketing 101. And the degree to which we're unconsciously just being pulled along from these primal mechanisms, right? There's this part of the brain, the reptilian mind, that really does just deal in terms of like basic primal feelings and desires. So how many times are you being unconsciously pulled through a doom scroll without even recognizing what it is you're actually looking for? And not saying that you can always mitigate that same type of allure or pull, but just like bring an awareness to it. Like, what thought is coming up for you in that moment? Is there a part, and is that part being located in a specific part of the body, right? Is there some sort of sensation that you feel, maybe in your solar plexus or genitals, or maybe it's in the root, or maybe it's in parts of the thighs or legs? And it's like just recognizing and acknowledging and sitting with those feelings versus disassociating, versus trying to kind of like get that need met in a sort of almost like desperate way through getting attention or seeking attention or reaching out to like an ex-partner or something, you know, like it's like, no, you can just recognize that you're capable of meeting those needs and validating those parts of you that maybe just need a little bit more acknowledgement. So I feel that's probably as far as I want to go into this discussion for now, but you know, maybe just let you know that there are no bad parts. Even these ones that have these desires, even if those desires feel problematic, even if it's been something that's caused you problems in the past, just recognizing that you can accept these parts, you can validate these parts. There are no bad parts. The parts are just trying to get your needs met. They're just trying to do something in a way that made sense when you were a kid or when you were a teenager or whatever, but probably don't necessarily make sense now. So I just want to say thank you for tuning in today. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and you're able to soften in to the rest of your routine, you know, start to wind down. And if there's anyone here who is looking for group spaces, I'm going to be starting to facilitate a men's circle. I'm going to be starting to facilitate integration circles. I'm going to be continuing to facilitate parts work groups, which is really just about education and witnessing. Just want to make that perfectly clear. We're not doing a deep dive with parts work in a group setting. And if any of you are interested in these offerings, please reach out over Facebook or reach out over Instagram or a variety of ways which I post my contact, and I can get you on an email list and I can let you know when my offerings are getting rolling. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Take care for now.